nonprofit advocacy group for the St. Johns River.
And our mission is to help protect the river.
Hello, welcome to the St. Johns Riverkeeper Show. I'm Jimmy Orth, the Executive Director of St. Johns Riverkeeper, and I'm here with my co-host, Neil Armingjon, your St. Johns Riverkeeper.
Jimmy, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yes, happy St. Patrick's Day to you too. We're here, we're going to talk a little bit, maybe a little later, Neil, about maybe a green river and how we can prevent that from happening.
Sadly, a green river.
Yeah, exactly, and we've talked about that on previous shows. But actually what we're going to talk about today on the show is we're going to talk about a little bit about our 10-year anniversary in history of St. Johns Riverkeeper, but more specifically about a luncheon that we recently had that was very successful. And we're going to watch part of the speech of our guest speaker at that luncheon that was very inspiring and educational. Before we get to that, Neil, I always like to kick off the show and have you give folks a little bit of information about who we are and what we do for those viewers out there that may not know.
Well, we are, for the last over 10 years, we've been a citizens group whose primary focus is the health of the St. Johns River and its protection. Every day we're working to protect what we believe is our greatest natural resource, the beautiful St. Johns River. We're a citizens group. We're a nonprofit, and we're a membership organization, and we depend on the community to help us fund the work that we do.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Neil, because that is important. We are independently funded.
Right.
We or I should say privately funded, but independent of government agencies.
Right.
And so we do rely on your support. And you can go on our website and learn more about us. We have lots of information about the programs and activities that we do and events that we host and are a part of, but also how you can get involved and become a member of St. Johns Riverkeeper. It's very easy on the website. We encourage y'all to do it because, one, we need your financial support, but we also need as many people as possible to be a part of this movement, because as more people we have, the more influence we have, and the louder the voice is for the St. Johns River. And I think that's critical. Is the reason this organization was started 10 years ago is because the founders recognized that there was a need for a voice for the St. Johns.
Yeah, I always say the people that helped form the organization that we work for were in many ways visionaries. They looked into the future, kind of foresaw some of the issues, but I think most importantly recognized the government, whether it's state, federal, local, in and of itself would not do the necessary things to protect the river, and that the river needed an advocate, if you will. And that's why we were created, and 10 years later, many people, I'm glad to say, report us as the voice of the St. Johns River.
And now, Neil, you have actually been the St. Johns Riverkeeper for now 7 years.
Yes.
So
yeah, tell people sometimes it seems like overnight, and sometimes it seems like a long time, but I've been blessed for the last 7 years to be working with you and the staff and this community on something that we feel passionately about, and that's the St. Johns River.
Well, Neil and I both, we work very closely together, obviously. I've been the executive director now for over 6 years.
Yeah.
And Neil and I have worked very closely over the last 6 years together. And I think for having a small staff and organization with a limited budget, we really have accomplished a lot. But we've done it, not you and I, but we've done it because of the support of the community that has given us the support we need and participated when we need them in the decision-making process. And so we have made a lot of progress, but unfortunately there's a lot that still needs to be done.
Still a lot to go.
Well, what recently I mentioned when we first started the show, we just had a luncheon, and this luncheon was it was to celebrate the 10 years of success that we've had, to look back and reflect on our past, but also to look to the future. And so during the luncheon we had a speaker come in. Her name is Cynthia Barnett. She is the author of Mirage, which is a book about the water crisis in Florida and actually throughout the entire Southeast. And it was really, one, it's a fascinating book and you need to read it.
Right, it's a great book.
We recommend it to everyone because the St. Pete Times actually recently selected Mirage as one of the 10 books every Floridian should read, and I agree, because water is something that is so critical to our future. Now, you may be out there watching and asking, well, what does water supply have to do with the St.
Right.
Johns River and its health? And I think what Cynthia showed and what we've tried to talk about on previous shows is there is this interconnection between
totally.
our groundwater, our lands, and our
Right.
surface waters.
Right. And what I tell people, Jimmy, one of the biggest single threats to the river is water. And when I say that to people, you kind of think that's an illogical statement, but it's not water in and of itself. It's how we as Floridians, as human beings, use water, and how our water demand is driving a whole series of events that threaten the health of not only the St. Johns River, the Ocklawaha River, Silver Springs. We've learned recently there's problems on the Santa Fe and Swanee River. So water and how we use it is inexorably linked to the future of this great resource, the river.
And two things that just specifically on that point, Neil, is one is we take too much water out of the ground,
Right.
and what's happening is it's causing harm to the aquifer,
Right.
saltwater intrusion, reduction of water for wetlands are drying up,
Right.
things like that
Springs
can happen, but then
reducing.
also spring flow. Exactly. Spring flow, a lot of the springs, the flow has declined dramatically,
Right.
and that affects the flow of the St. Johns as well,
Right.
because 30% of the flow of the St. Johns is from springs.
Right, from underground.
And then, as we've talked previously on shows extensively about the water withdrawal proposals.
Absolutely.
So the surface waters are being threatened because we're taking too much out of the ground. Now they want to take water out of the
Right.
flow of the St. Johns River.
And, recently, actually this week in the local newspaper, the headlines were about drinking water, and what was announced, I guess you could say this week, kind of formally, Jimmy, we've been following this process. Black Creek, which is synonymous with life in Clay County, is now being targeted as a water source. Some people are talking about taking over 30 million gallons of fresh water a day. And then a river that a lot of us don't see but is really important to the state of Florida is the St. Mary's River, which begins in Georgia, flows through Baker County, parts of Duval, and eventually flows into the Swanee. It's being looked at. Over 30 million gallons. Those rivers are facing the same threat that we've talked about many times on this show. Looking at water not as an ecological value, but where's a cheap supply of water?
Well, and that's what's we're going to go to the video and watch Cynthia, the beginning of her speech, where she actually at the beginning talks about some of the problems and how we've gotten to this point, and what are some of the reasons for the water problems that we're experiencing today. So let's go ahead and watch that first part of her speech.
For those of you who haven't read Mirage, I'll give you the Cliff's Notes in just 2 sentences. Florida set out to get rid of water, and we got rid of too much. So Florida's water mistakes can be distilled down to 2 biggies. One, taking too much water out of the natural systems. In the 19th century, that meant draining and dredging, working to drain a state half submerged. We never imagined how sorely we would come to miss 9 million acres of wetlands drained statewide. In the 20th century, add groundwater pumping. Until recently, we viewed our aquifers as endless, and we pumped them freely, never imagining there either how seriously we were threatening our groundwater supply. Water mistake number 2 was over-relying on massive infrastructure projects. We thought that altering the natural waterways, for example, damming and straightening the Kissimmee River, would solve our problems, but we neglected to factor in the rule of unintended consequences, which has proven again and again that the bigger and costlier... Did I lose the microphone? I can just try to... Can you hear me without it, or shall we try to fix it? Okay.